Okay, in this video we are going to start talking about fractions. So if you were to think about it, how would you explain a fraction to a student? So like a student that's never actually heard of the word fraction, who's never actually seen a fraction written out, how would you explain to a student? And so if you were in class, we would all bounce around ideas of what we might do. And the usual answers are take something they know and cut it in half. So most people say something about like take a pizza, usually food because kids like, you know, pizza or candy or something like that. Take a pizza and cut in half. Okay, so if I have this pizza, you know, here's my pepperonis on it, or however you want to draw your pizza. If I were to cut it in half, now I have 1/2 of a pizza over here and 1/2 of a pizza over here. And kids as young as 3, 4, 5 years old can understand that because when you're splitting, you know, a piece of cake in half, they want to make sure it's super equal and make sure that everybody gets the same amount. So kids are very familiar with this. So the question is, do I always have to just cut things in half? Okay, so do we always have to cut things in half to describe a fraction? And the answer is no, we don't. That's one way of doing it, but it's not the only way of doing it. Okay, so this is specifically talking about like what we just did right here. This is an area model for fractions. We have 3 different models, and this is just one of them, an area model. Okay, so a different way I could do this or talk about fractions, instead of talking about cutting things in half or in thirds or in fourths, instead I could talk about a set of things. Okay, so if I was going to talk about a set of things, let's say we had, say we have 4 pieces of candy. Okay, so here's my 4 pieces of candy. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if I needed to split this in half, this set in half, could I do that? Well, yeah, and a student wouldn't have a problem with that, especially if 4 pieces of candy and you say you're splitting it between you and your sister. How much do you get? Well, I get half, right? So here's one set over here. This is half of my set. Here's the other set over here. The other half, when I put them together, I get a whole set. Okay? And this specifically is talking about, or is called the set model. Okay, so I could explain fractions with an area model. I could explain fractions with a set model. And then the other way I could think about it is like on a number line. So on a number line, if I had the number 4, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I had the number 4 here, so here's my number 4. If I was going to cut that in half, what is half of 4? Well, cut it in half like that, and half of 4 is 2 because it's 2 equal parts now. Okay, and this is called the line model. Okay, so we basically have 3 different types of models for fractions. And let me make a little table over here. So our 3 different models for fractions. So this is how you would introduce fractions to students. If they are advanced, if they've been doing fractions for a long time, you would only need to refer back to models on situations where they're like having issues understanding something. Remember, this is the why, not the how. So this is explaining what fractions are, why they work, why we can do different things with them. Okay, so 3 different models for fractions. I can use an area model, I can use a set model, or I could use a line model. Okay, so some examples for an area model. We already did one of them, like a pizza problem. You could also, for an area model, use like I mean, any food, right? Any food or candy. Nope. Let's say candy for a second. Any food like an apple, a pie, right? Usually we do like circles or something like that. You could also do like a measuring cup. So if I have a measuring cup, half of a cup, a third of a cup, okay? So those are some examples for area model. We have manipulatives that we use for each of these models, and the manipulative for area is pattern blocks. And that's why I made you do your project before today, so that you would have these to use, okay? So then a set model, this is having like a set of things. So a set of candy. So not like one candy bar, but like lots of candy, pieces of candy, like the example we did a minute ago. So you could still do candy over here, but it needs to be like a whole candy bar you're cutting into pieces. This is like a handful of candy, splitting it up into different sets. Okay, we could also, we could do like, I mean, any kind of object pencils. You could do money. You could do like all the students in a class. Okay, so the manipulatives for a set model can be anything. Like you can use M&Ms to represent your set. You could use counters, like those colored counters we did the other day. You could use colored counters like that for your set model. Just something that you can do a lot of. So I'm just going to put counters. And the counters could be pom-poms. They could be M&Ms. They could be whatever you have with you. Okay, and then a line model. An example, I could do specifically a number line, like we did a minute ago. I could also use a ruler. Take a ruler and split it into 2 parts, into 3 parts, into 5 parts. I could do like a measuring tape. Or I could do, let's see what else, like a string. Take a string and split it into pieces. Okay, and the manipulative for a line model is Cuisenaire rods. And usually we abbreviate these like C rods is what we call them. Okay, so the last thing I want to go over is ways to represent a fraction, or ways to think about fractions. So a fraction has a top and a bottom, the number on top and the number on bottom. The number on top is called the numerator. The number on bottom is called the denominator. You could also think about this as the number on top represents the number of parts you have. The number on bottom is the whole. Okay, so in general, when we're talking about fractions, the number on top is going to be how many parts I have, and the number on bottom is how many parts make a whole. Okay, so the number on top is the number of parts I have. Let me go ahead and write I have. And the number on bottom is the number of parts that make a whole. Okay, and just a reminder, if I wanted to draw 1/2 here, if I drew it like this, is that 1/2? Well, no, and any kid can tell you that, especially if that's a candy bar and you're splitting it and that's the part they get and the other part's the part their sister gets. It's not a half, because your parts have to be equal. So that's the big part of fraction, is it has to be equal parts, and we always have to relate it back to a whole.